Beatrice was interested in work.
Oh, yeah.
A lot. And there's a joyful and playful side to her for sure. But she was intent, when she came, I mean, she got tenure at UC Irvine and therefore had a sabbatical coming up, which is what led her to decide to do a PhD because she had some writing she wanted to do and had the illusion that graduate school was a good place to write. Never mind. Anyway, I was lucky enough. Lucky enough to meet her in that context. But she was fierce. At the very first day in the office, that I was not to regard art as some sort of decoration, and that the art, you know, that the writing was theory and the art wasn't, as if I would ever think such a thought. She was intent on the simultaneity of inquiry, art, politics, performance, thinking, living, writing, practice. She was intent on these forms, these different forms needing each other.
May I intervene? So I came with some incredible quotes by all three of you, and I'd like to read one by Beatrice at this moment. I think it's appropriate. Considering the subject of artist as researcher can give one feelings of temporal disorientation. On the one hand, it seems impossible that research was not always a part of the artistic process, and that a method that has always been used is only being rediscovered and revitalized. After all, wasn't one of the key modern models of the artist born from the Renaissance hybrid subject, fueled by the energy of interdisciplinary invention? On the other hand, research as an artistic practice, or as a significant component of it, has such an aura of newness. Artists appear to be scouting and squatting in what for them are uncharted territories of knowledge, specialization, and methodological difference that were either once off limits or simply undesirable. Either way, the research component of artistic practice has ebbed and flowed over the decades. So maybe the questions are, why is this model being reproduced and reinvented, and how is this artist subject being constructed? Would you like to respond to Beatrice?
Well, I think that the talk I gave is a response to that the artist subject is reconstructing this relationship of art, science, thinking, doing.
Well, I guess I've been thinking in all this about the sort of this difficulties, the formal strategies of trying to do the work that Beatrice is doing while being herself ill and feeling like shit a lot, But leaving that aside, just the various ways in which she's both putting herself in the equation of work animals, really, and taking her subjectivity out of it constantly. I mean, I think the ordinariness of everything, or just ordinariness, is such an incredibly intense theme in what she does. The dailiness, I mean, the stuff that you can just get, the things that you do over and over. It's a really, I really liked when you said boring, because I thought, you know, that's a sort of nervy strategy.
Mm-hmm.
To just say, okay, I'm doing this, and then I'm doing it again, and yes, it's boring, and I'm doing it again.
I am not going to entertain you.
Yes, that's not my job to entertain
My
you.
job is not entertainment here.
Right.
But Donna mentioned in her talk a refusal of subjectivity in the piece, so that it's not just...
A refusal of certain kinds of interiority.
Yeah.
There are subjects in these pieces.
Right.
And certain kinds of exploration of, it's an affect, the affective construction is not of the examination of conscience or examination of self, but it's the production of a working, thinking subject.
Right. It's the machine. I mean, it's the apparatus. It's trying to get the thing going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And machine not
It's
is a bad
prosthetic,
term, but
yeah.
And this panel, that's the closest to mimesis that you get, where she has the hands of the yoga pose,
Yeah.
and the hands of the scientist,
Right.
and the paws of the little anesthetized mice, and her counting backwards in a claw form, which is a tiny echo of yellow, the chrysanthemum,
Right.
which is of course also the result of long breeding. Anyway, it's that the subject that is created for me by that panel. I want quite to finish that sentence.
I want to think about feminist film theory's early demand for feminist strategies that would refute identification from the audience members. I want to write the audience members' ability or inability to be subjected, to be made into a subject herself in this project. And I heard you both talking about that. So it's not just Beatrice's refusal or sort of play with her identity and her cross-species and cross-object sorts, but that she's making that for us as well in the position of the audience who wants so much to identify with anything that's on a screen.
And I also think, though, that Beatrice never went for the attack on pleasure that particular moment of feminist film theory could revel in. Dying for the other is very abstemious about pleasure. It is about suffering, and it is about surviving. It's not all about suffering. I think it's about the labor of dying for the other, for and with. It neither indulges suffering nor pleasure. It's a severe form, in a way that Pigeon Blog is not. I think that Beatrice cultivates different sorts of presence in her works, and they're never about examining interiority for its own sake. I don't know how to say that.
You did say
Well, you get to see the sort of the outside gestures that could make you believe in interiority. I mean, but you're pushed away from it at the same time. I mean, you see it, you see the shape of it, you see the outside shape of something that you could fantasize was interiority if somebody else had made the work, but it's not there. Yeah, it's a lot of it's the mechanics, you know, it's again and again the mechanics.
Which she's really interested in.
Yeah. That's why I actually think the yoga stuff is really important in this. You know, I mean, there's like a whole other sort of reading of the discipline of doing that. I mean, that practice. Those poses.
May I push in another place? And we'll be talking for about 5 more minutes here before we open up the floor.
Unless you're getting really restive.
I hope you're not, because I want to hear these women talk some more. This is from Donna Haraway, and I hope you'll hear the resonance in the work. The cyborg would not recognize the Garden of Eden. It is not made of mud and cannot dream of returning to dust. Perhaps this is why I want to see if cyborgs can subvert the apocalypse of returning to nuclear dust in the manic compulsion to name the enemy. Cyborgs are not reverent. They do not remember the cosmos. They are wary of holism, but needy for connection. They seem to have a natural feel for united front politics, but without the vanguard party. The main trouble with cyborgs, of course, is that they are the illegitimate offspring of militarism and patriarchal capitalism, not to mention state socialism. But the illegitimate offspring are often exceedingly unfaithful to their origins. Their fathers, after all, are inessential. I'm wondering if that resonates with the work that we've seen today for either of you. You yourself, many years ago.
I think I want to just leave it to resonate.
Yeah.
And open up as soon as possible. But
Okay.
No, I'd leave it too. I mean, it's such a weird few sentences that you wrote on it. Let's just let them be.
they were channeled.
Okay. One more, Catherine Lord. Her baldness made up this list to put the telling in her voice, to warn people to stay away from pity, to be remembered because she thought she might die. She made up this list so that she could be strong and proud and brave and full of energy and motion in the middle of the desolation that is cyberspace. Even if she hated how she looked, and it took pretty much all she had sometimes to get down the stairs to the computer in her studio and stay there, she made up this list because she needed an audience in order to stay alive. And so she plucked an audience out of thin air.
Well, compared to Beatrice, that's just so interior.
It's okay.
But I do think, I mean, well, there is this sort of, you know, like the loner undertone in Beatrice's work. I mean, is she making this, like, I don't exactly feel addressed by this work. I mean, I'm always being pushed out of it. I don't feel exactly like I'm collaborating as an audience. I don't think I'm, you know, the reflection that makes the work for the artist at all. It's an odd feeling. Like I feel
That's interesting.
redundant. Yeah, it's a sort of loop that she's making. God, I feel
That's interesting. It is the least, for me, in terms of Beatrice's work, it's the hardest one to stay with, and it's not because it's about a hard topic, because I think it's about it is the most formalist of her work, in my experience of it. And I then think that formalism was one of the ways that she protected herself to keep working. In other words, I apply a motivation. I fantasize a motivation.
Yeah, but see, I'm not sure it was, I think it was, I don't think I'm writing about this very clumsily, but I think there was no other choice for her. I think her work is ethical, and that the formal strategies that she's choosing are ethical strategies, and they were the only thing that she could do. I mean, it's an up against the wall piece of work. It's like it would have been, or it gives the appearance of, there would have been no other way to do it.
I've got emails from Beatrice during the period when she's trying to set up the relation with the lab researcher, and her, you know, saying things like, I wanted there to be something with the mice. I wanted some way to have some kind of relationship with the mice who were in some non-trivial way suffering for me, but the whole lab scene made that silly. Or that's not her term, but there was no such relationship. It was not available, it was not on, it was romantic at best. If she was to take the mice seriously, she had to take them seriously this way.
In those terms.
Again, it was an ethical, aesthetic. She was rather clear about what she wanted. She couldn't have.
Right.
And what she could have is what she.
But if she had gotten what she thought she wanted, I don't think the piece would be that good. As good as it is. It would have been a different piece, but I think something happened because she had no access that way. There was no way to romanticize
And she
those
took that
mice.
seriously.
Yeah.
All right, I'd like to end with a quote from her. I think she responds in her thinking to what you have been talking about, and then we're going to open up the floor. She writes, I have come to ask myself at which point the political potential, so clearly inherent in the arts and their ability to consciously work with matters of presentation and representation, might break apart when approaching the sciences too closely.
Who's saying that?
Beatrice.
Okay. It didn't.
But it could have.
Could have. She was a lover and hater of science. Love and rage was the affect. But how not? I mean, how can you take sciences seriously without being in a state of love and rage? All the time. And your ordinary strategies for keeping cool break apart in the face of these power-hungry projects. I don't know. Don't want to prattle on about that.
We'd like to take this opportunity to have some comments from the floor. Not so much questions, comments.
Why not questions?
Questions if you'd like.
Just curious.
Speech acts.
Speech acts from the floor before we more informally meet over wine and water and snacks. Rachel Lee?
Thank you. That was really a really interesting trialogue. And I understand the piece, which I saw right before coming up here, much better, I think. I was actually really struck by, Donna Haraway, you're characterizing this piece, Dying for the Other, as about the labor of living and dying. And maybe it's because I think of labor as a kind of charged political, ethical term. Yeah, maybe you did say work. But the reason why I bring that up is I also thought that what rang true was the idea that this was an Estemius piece, and that there's this kind of teaching of something called non-identificatory, I don't know what, memory. And the piece earlier that you pointed to with the iris, I thought was, in a sense, the place of subjectivity and sentimentality that we sometimes long for. I will remember you. I don't know how, right? I will either remember you subjectively in my head, but will I kinesthetically, mimic you? I don't know. And I was just thinking about this other ethical practice that I think is being suggested here through this kind of entanglement, but entanglement just sounds so neutral, but instead it's like, if I just isn't the right word, if I mirror you, it's a kind of memory. I don't know, I'm actually now rambling, but I guess it's this kernel, this idea that I've seen now in this artist that I didn't even see before, that I thought was really interesting. So thank you all.
I don't think you can be a feminist and be a critic of instrumentalization. I think that only those who believe in the life of the mind can think that the means-end problem is solved with a critique of instrumentalization. So I think work and labor for feminists always involve the problem of those who cannot be ends in themselves without also being means toward ends that are not their own, or may also, that the means-ends problem formulated for feminists involves a very different relationship to the question of instruments. And I take Beatrice's constant interest in things, including machines, critters, machines, so forth, so on, her really incredibly grainy, particular, really detailed interest in the thinginess of the world, to be, among other things, a feminist interrogation of the means-ends problem.
Could you tell us your name?
Candace,
Hi, Kim.
I had a question. Well, I don't know if it's really a question, but related to the idea of the work of living and dying for the other, and what Catherine said about the kind of ambiguity around who is the other. I guess I was wondering, like, what position would Beatrice's work take on kind of the idea of martyrdom, or like if you think about the phrase of dying for the other, I think of Jesus, and this idea of martyrdom, but there seems to be an anti-martyrdom too in her work. So I don't know. I just was wondering about that.
I think she's playing with those things, you know. I mean, I do think she's playing with the ambiguities of dying for the other. I mean, on the one hand, it's a sort of, it's got to happen, and on the other hand, there is this sort of weird erotic resonance that's in the back of your head.
As there is with Jesus on the cross.
But what's
As there is, yes, both of those layers.
But without sentimentality. I mean, we've been returning to this over and over again, and the, eroticism without sentimentality, without sentiment. I mean, the work is so dry in a lot of ways, right? So that martyr story you're telling me is such a sentimental story, and this is not a sentimental piece. She does not want pity. She does not want weeping. She is not asking for that bodily response. And I think it's a really curious piece of feminist work for that, in the way that she is denying affect.
But she's sort of eliciting it at the same time she's denying its possibility.
Yes.
I mean,
I don't experience it as denying affect. I experience it as cultivating the affects of being available. The kind of, I think yoga matters there. I think there is a kind of mode of attention that's being cultivated, which is very much an affect. To be affected is an affect. And I also think that she's playing off of the ordinary everyday language in a laboratory when you kill a mouse is to sacrifice them. I think she's both playing off of that and refusing the sacrificial theater of sacrifice for knowledge, which is the conventional modernist, barely secularized religious, barely secularized Christian frame of scientific knowledge involves that particular kind of dying for the other. And Beatrice knows it. She's a serious intellectual, and I think that this piece cultivates a particular kind of affectual and affected being available state. I think.
I think that's where she thinks about audience. It's almost as if it's just sort of taunting you at about 3 removes. Like, I know you're going to think this, and then sort of taking that away. It's like, here's the reference out there.
But I want to
She
think
predicts what you will think, and then,
that intellectualism as a form of affect that's both recorded and produced by the piece. And I wonder if we can think about intellectualism of that as a form of affect.
The affect of thinking?
Yes, the affect of thinking.
My whole professional life is an effort to perform that.
Very well. Great.
So I just wanted to add that idea of martyrdom and how Beatrice's work was certainly not that at all. And even in the preparation for this exhibition, I think it really helped me that it was about the work and it was about getting it done. And I think there was a level of comfort in it, and I think perhaps in a way it was also the way that Beatrice reveals that in the film, it also helps the viewer. The fact that it's not this kind of romantic idea of dying. And also, Catherine, I loved your meditation on dying for the other, and the idea of the erotic was kind of a surprising twist for me, but it makes so much sense, and I think that idea of dying for is also such a proclamation of living, which I appreciated.
Please.
Oh, well,
Could you tell us who you are?
oh, I'm sorry. My name is Richard. Um, well, I also watched the video just before the presentation. When I first sat down, I was pushed back a little bit, not really knowing what I was going to see when I came here. I wasn't expecting death. However, once I let myself relax for a moment, I started to relate very much to the methodology because I feel my own mortality. And I often think about the strategy of dying as an artist, thinking that the perfect death is that you would be making art as you're dying. So I saw the methodology of an artist figuring out a way to continue to make art to the very end. And I really, really appreciated that.
I also know that Beatrice was working up until 48 hours before she died, if not 5 hours, literally, and that it was extremely hard. That passage that you chose from The Summer of Her Baldness is very apt, somehow getting into the studio, or that this is a person for whom continuing to do her life's work in a state of sheer rage. I think the anger never abated. This was not a person who approached death through reconciliation, which is a perfectly legitimate way, I think, to die. I think there are many ways to die. I think Beatrice performed working through anger and the accepting of the help. She got abundant help from family and friends, which was terribly important and frequently tender, but never easy. A fierce independence and a sustained anger. There were those of us who made the mistake of suggesting some more reconciliation, were quickly found out that that was a seriously bad idea.
That's where the word play and the multiple meaning of work and the work has been really resonant for me in thinking about the work,
Right.
and the way she worked until she died. Right up until the moment that she died, she was working as an artist, as a theorist, as a scientist, she had a name for it. Political technoscience artist. And then the work remains, and we have the work, which is our work now. And so I appreciate your comment very much, because it's in the work, and it was her work, and it's how she balanced or assisted herself in her own dying and her own living in that period. And we see it in the piece. Yes, thank you all very much for coming.